Hello, my name is Brittany Braswell, and I'm a registered and licensed dietitian, and today I'm going to be reviewing the Paleo Diet. I'll discuss a little bit about the authors and creators of the Paleo Diet, as well as the premise and background. We'll also discuss some of the foods that are and are not included within the dietary guidelines proposed by the authors, and then we'll discuss a little bit about the nutritional analysis and what nutrients may be excessive or deficient, and how that may also apply to the athletic population. So the premise of the Paleo Diet states that because our genes were first developed during the Paleolithic era, authors believe that we should be consuming those same types of foods because they believe our genes have not changed since that time. So Christine Rosenblum is a registered dietitian nutritionist, as well as a board-certified specialist in sports dietetics, meaning she has professional background with nutrition within the athletic field. And she was quoted in an article from Nutrition Today stating that it's really impossible to completely identify exactly what our ancestors ate during the Paleolithic era, and that even if we could identify it down to the T, it would be nearly impossible to replicate because of the difference in vegetation and animal life. These are the authors and creators of the Paleo Diet and the Paleo Diet for athletes. So pictured on the left is Loren Cordain. He has a background with a master's degree in physical education and a PhD in health. And then Joe Friel is pictured on the right, and his background is a master's in exercise science, and he's a triathlon and cycling coach. So I think it's important to note that although they both do have some health background, neither of them has a degree or credentials making them nutrition professionals. So I think this is always an important consideration when choosing some type of lifestyle or meal plan or fad diet to follow. So these are some of the foods that are typically permitted on the Paleo Diet. When you start looking at menus, you notice a lot of meat, organ meats, wild meats, different types of poultry and pork, as well as lots of eggs, fresh and frozen fruits, very small amounts of dried fruits, non-starchy vegetables. So these would be things like carrots, broccoli, peppers, lots of nuts and seeds. However, even though we typically think of peanuts as nuts, they are not included in this diet because they are considered legumes. There's also some different amounts of oils and a very moderate amount of alcohol in the form of wine or spirits or beer. They also allow tea, coffee, and diet sodas. So I think just as a point here, it's good to note that diet sodas, beer, coffee, these are probably not items that were available in the Paleolithic era. So that's kind of one little red flag as far as how it matches the premise of the diet. So these are some of the foods that authors state should be avoided on the Paleo Diet. Most of them primarily consist of high carbohydrate containing food items, things like starchy vegetables, which would be your regular sweet potatoes, no dairy, so no milk, yogurt, cheeses, no legumes, which would be beans and peas, no regular cereals or grains, so things like rice and quinoa, no fatty or cured meats, no salt-containing foods, no regular sweets or desserts, and then no sugary beverages like regular soft drinks or fruit juice. Some of the claims that authors have made about the Paleo Diet is that it normalizes both insulin and insulin sensitivity. It has a very low salt or sodium content. They also claim that it can improve athletic performance, which we'll discuss a little bit more in depth later, and that it reduces the risk of developing various types of acute and chronic diseases, some of which are listed here. So different psychological disorders that might affect mood, osteoporosis. We'll also discuss that a little bit further as we go. And one of the main things that as a dietitian I notice is that they claim that it will reduce the risk of developing vitamin deficiencies. So before we continue, I do want to point out that there are some really great things about the Paleo Diet. Sugar and salt intake overall is pretty limited. which can prevent a lot of different health issues. There is a very high emphasis placed on lean meats and branched-chain amino acid intake. There's a pretty high intake of fish and nuts, which can be really good sources of those essential fatty acids that our body needs. Most people in the paleo diet should be consuming more than 5 servings a day of fruits and vegetables, so this typically results in a high fiber intake if you're adhering to the diet very strictly. Avoidance of excessive intake of highly processed carbohydrates, so there's not a lot of consumption of, there shouldn't be any consumption of bread items and muffins and different types of carbohydrates that have just been really, really highly processed. There's also a good recognition of how low glycemic index fruits and vegetables may be beneficial. There's 0 to moderate alcohol intake recommended, which is really beneficial as well. And they do stress the need and importance of regular exercise. So most people don't get enough exercise, and with the paleo diet, they do highly recommend it. One of the things that stuck out to me the most with this diet as far as health benefits go is that there is quite a lot of consumption of fish. Fish is one of the items that most Americans don't consume enough of. The typical recommendation is about twice or more a week, and with the paleo diet, you're probably going to be consuming fish several times a week. And a lot of fatty fish contain the omega-3 fatty acids. Omega-3 and omega-6 fats are the types of fats that our body cannot produce. So we have to take them in through our diet, and that is one heart-healthy benefit of the paleo diet, is that you are getting adequate amounts of this. So there are some points that should be argued within the guidelines of the paleo diet, and especially when pertaining to athletes. So I think it's important to note from the get-go that it's not appropriate for all types of athletes. This diet is typically geared toward endurance athletes, so you can see pictured here things like rowing, cross-country skiing, triathletes. These are the types of athletes that this is geared for. However, there's really a lack of research that supports their claims to improve performance and recovery, and we'll continue to go over this a little bit more. This diet also requires a lot of exceptions if athletes are expected to consume this diet and stick to it, and if they're going to expect any type of optimal performance. There are going to be a lot of exceptions needed. Overall, the paleo diet tends to be nutritionally inadequate. Some of the major nutrients of concern as far as deficiencies go are calcium, iron, and carbohydrates. One study conducted by Mike Gleason, he was just looking at athletes and looking at their blood chemistry, and happened to notice that women and young athletes tend to have lower levels of iron, calcium, zinc, and magnesium. So what this tells me as a dietitian is that if I'm coaching or working with any type of young or female athlete, that they may need a diet higher in those 4 nutrients. However, with the paleo diet, because it's low already in calcium and iron, it's very likely going to be inappropriate for these types of athletes. Paleo diet also fails to take into consideration the varying needs of different types of athletes as far as their total calorie intake goes. If you have an athlete who is smaller, or if you have an athlete who tends to burn less calories and maybe needs a lower energy intake, then their nutrient concentration is going to have to be a little bit different. They're going to need foods that are more highly concentrated in certain nutrients than those athletes who may be consuming larger amounts of food as a whole. So you'll see this as we continue to look at the sample menus in the following. Some of the exceptions that are going to be required in order for athletes to be able to meet their nutritional needs are going to be the inclusion of protein powders for the additional branched-chain amino acids that they need, different types of meal replacement drinks and bars, as well as energy gels and sports drinks that might be included before or during exercise in order to make sure they're getting adequate amounts of carbohydrate and protein. High glycemic index recovery drinks and high glycemic load foods like potatoes or dried fruit are typically going to be important for recovery after exercise. And because the paleo diet does not include these types of items, it may be very difficult for athletes to meet their needs. And so these would be some exceptions that they would have to make. I found this quote from Dr. Steve Hertler. He's a registered and licensed dietitian with EAS Sports Nutrition, and it states, if the diet itself requires multiple exceptions to facilitate optimal performance, then is it really so great to begin with? This is my thought exactly. If you're claiming that a particular diet is going to enhance performance, but then it's going to require lots of exceptions so that they can actually meet their needs, then it's probably not the type of diet that you want to start with. So it's just something to consider as we continue. It's so important when choosing a lifestyle change, especially with nutrition, to look at what the research says and not just what celebrities are saying or what authors are claiming. So a lot of the studies done to date have involved subjects who are primarily overweight or obese, and they typically have some type of chronic disease such as diabetes, metabolic syndrome, heart disease, and others. A lot of these studies have also come from the same lab, or they've had very small sample sizes or very short study durations. This can be a problem in really determining how not only accurate but how strong the evidence really is. If you have a very small study population, then your results may be skewed one way or the other. So in order to have good solid research, we really need more studies from a variety of populations with much larger sample sizes, and we need to follow them for longer periods of time to really determine some of the long-term effects. So to the best of my knowledge, after reviewing the literature and after reviewing some information from other nutrition and healthcare professionals, to the best of my knowledge, there have been no studies conducted regarding the paleo diet in athletes or in sports performance, at least none that have been published. So it's really important that if we're going to recommend that this diet be given to athletes of any type, that the research needs to be done in those populations before any of those recommendations should be made. There's also not been any studies regarding various types of inflammatory or autoimmune diseases. There have not been any looking at bone density in regards to osteopenia or osteoporosis. And the paleo diet has not been researched as far as how it might affect mood or mental function. So all of these are claims that are currently being made, and the research is actually lacking to be able to support these claims at this time. So as a whole, studies have shown that the paleo diet has been highly associated with weight loss. So this is a really good thing. However, my question is this weight loss actually due to the specific nutritional content of the paleo diet, or is it mainly due just to lower energy intake? With the paleo diet, because there's such high consumption of vegetables and there's lower intake of sweets and a lot of your extra highly processed carbohydrate-based foods, energy intake tends to be a little lower than a standard American diet. So it's not to say that paleo diet does not result in weight loss. It just may be a question as to, is it specifically the paleo diet that's causing weight loss, or is it just having to do with energy intake? So we've talked about what foods are both recommended and which foods should be avoided based on the guidelines for the paleo diet. But what does the author have to say about supplements? So Lauren Cordain, author of the Paleo Diet, states that some supplements may actually be needed. This is automatically a red flag to me because one of the dietary claims of the paleo diet was that it would prevent vitamin deficiencies. They also say that they want this diet to be based on what our ancestors ate during the Paleolithic era. However, we know that our Paleolithic ancestors did not have access to supplements. So again, we see another exception to the premise of the book, and this is not, the vitamin supplementation is not only suggested, but it's really required in order to prevent some deficiencies. You'll see here we have 3 antioxidants that they recommend for supplementation, including vitamin C, vitamin E, and selenium. Vitamin D is also suggested to supplement daily. And if you are not a fish eater, then they do recommend a fish oil supplement daily. And really, if you're not a fish eater, this diet is going to be very difficult to stick to, as fish is included on several of the menus. My other question with this is, because from a review we've already noticed that calcium and iron tend to be low, they don't recommend either of these supplements. So that kind of poses another question to me as far as how they anticipate you meeting your daily recommendations for calcium and iron even without supplements. So the Paleo Diet states that there are 3 different levels of severity. We've got level 1, which is your entry level, and this states that you can have 3 of your 20 meals that are cheating, basically, that are non-paleo. Level 2, it goes down to 2 out of 20 meals or snacks. And then level 3 is where they consider you to have maximum weight loss, and this would only be 1 of every 20 meals and snacks per week that is non-paleo based. So this would be a meal or snack basically of your choosing, and we'll show you an example of this when we get to the sample menus. This is a 3-day sample menu based on the Paleo Diet. If you see a star next to an item, then that means that recipe is included in the book, so you know how it might differ from a typical recipe, and it'll give you all of the ingredients to purchase. This would be a level 2 meal plan, as it includes 2 non-paleo meal options. I just put 2 examples in there of meals that someone might choose for those 2 options. So take a minute, look it over, and try to see what types of things you notice that may be different. I know the very first thing that jumps out at me is that it doesn't have portion sizes for anything. So automatically, if I'm trying to follow the Paleo Diet, I have no idea how much food to eat. It looks like there's a lot of food items, so that's kind of the second thing that jumps out at me. And there are a lot of fruits and vegetables. So we're going to break this down just a little bit further. Based on that menu, it's pretty easy to tell that this is not going to be practical or budget friendly for the typical person. Based on just those 3 days worth of meals and snacks, you're going to need about 55 different ingredients at the grocery store just to make all of those different items. A lot of the meats and seafood and game that's found within the Paleo Diet can be very difficult to find and can be really expensive. Some of the game meats include things like caribou and alligator, so based on your geographical location, you may or may not be able to find those types of meats near you. There's also a noticeable lack of foods that are less expensive. So they're not typical items that most people would have in their pantry, like beans, rice, bread, bagels. I mean, there's hardly any breakfast items either. So we're going to look at another sample menu pulled directly from the Paleo Diet for athletes that's going to be a little bit different, but you'll notice some similarities. So this particular diet is based on what they would suggest for a female who's requiring about 2,200 calories a day. So this does have portion sizes listed, but automatically you can tell that none of them are in typical American standard measurements. They're all in grams, meaning that as you're going through building your plate, you're going to have to weigh out every item you have in order to determine how much food to consume. This can be very time consuming as well, so for me that would be an automatic turnoff. Also, pay attention to the items that are in blue. On the next slide, I'm going to give you a little bit more information about this. So with this particular menu for this 2,200 calorie a day meal plan for this female, there were no beverages listed. So we just have to assume that she's going to be consuming water or some other type of calorie-free beverage. Her menu also includes meat and salad twice a day. So if I was following this diet, it would just be really monotonous. I think you get tired of it pretty quickly. And we've already stated that there were no American household measurements. So once we convert those, you can see on the right, you're going to end up with huge portions of your meats and your broccoli and tomato. So 333 grams of broiled salmon is what was listed for breakfast. And once converted, this is almost 12 ounces of fish, which is the equivalent of about 4 decks of cards. That is a lot of fish for breakfast. So it's not really very realistic for a person to eat 12 ounces of fish in one sitting, especially for breakfast. There's also 468 grams of steamed broccoli, which when converted is about 6 cups. So in addition to your 8 1/4 ounces of sirloin at dinner, you're also going to need another 6 cups of broccoli. So keep in mind, this is a female. This is not suggested for a big football player. And it's just a lot of food at one time. Also, between the lunch and dinner menus, she's going to be consuming 3 entire tomatoes. So realistically, how is she expected to eat this amount of food? It's very large portions, and even though the calories are not excessive, we're sticking to the 2200 because some of these items are lower in calorie and because they're trying to meet a certain protein level, it just ends up being very, very large amounts of food, which is not realistic for most people. So as far as the nutrition analysis goes, for this 2200 calorie meal plan, there is a lot of dietary fiber. So this woman would be consuming about 43 grams a day, and the adequate intake in females that might be consuming this meal are about 21 to 26 grams a day, which is it's a good thing. Most Americans don't get enough fiber. However, some of the issues you may come across by getting this amount are possibly constipation if you're not consuming adequate fluids to go with all of that fiber. And for an athlete, it may leave them feeling really full because fiber causes the stomach to empty more slowly. So they may feel some GI distress during practice or during any type of strenuous activity. And they may also feel too full at the next meal time, so they may not consume all of the food, resulting in a decreased energy intake. So this may not be an issue if you are trying to lose weight. However, for athletes, we don't want them consuming too few calories because they need enough to combat all of the energy expenditure they have during their particular sport. There's also about 10 grams of omega-3 fatty acids consumed in this meal plan, and the adequate intake for a female would be usually 1 to 2 grams a day. So for this particular woman, just a little over a gram a day. According to the NIH, there's a lack of evidence dealing with long-term safety of having this 10 grams a day, which would be about 10 times the recommended amount. So they also looked at some in vitro studies which showed increased levels of free radical formation, and free radicals are associated with different types of cancer. So it's not to say that omega-3 fatty acids are bad, but we just don't have enough research right now to know, is 10 grams really going to have that much more benefit than the current recommendation of 1.1 grams a day. Continuing our nutrition analysis, there's about 9,000 milligrams of potassium that would be taken in if you fully consumed each meal on that 2,200 calorie meal plan. So that's about 2.5 times the daily value. And then there's about 900 milligrams of folic acid that would be consumed. For most men and women, the recommendation is 400 micrograms a day. Pregnant women need about 800, so it's not going to be dangerous, but it is about twice the recommended level. Then for vitamin E, the recommendation for the RDA is 15 milligrams a day, and with this particular meal plan, she'd be getting 19.5 international units, so that's fine. She exceeds the 100%, but it's not at a dangerous level. Just as a point to note, all of these intake levels are typically going to be a result of the very large portion sizes that she consumes from both the salmon and the broccoli. So it's not going to be very realistic for the average person. So if this woman on this 2,200 calorie meal plan doesn't end up eating all of the food on her plate. She doesn't want to eat 12 ounces of salmon, or she doesn't want to eat 6 cups of broccoli. She may actually end up being deficient in some of these nutrients. Overall, this menu meets less than 70% of the recommended dietary allowance for calcium. This can be really dangerous for women, especially as far as bone health goes and the potential cause of bone loss or osteoporosis. So on average, the paleo diet tends to meet about 86% of the recommended dietary allowance for iron, and this would just be for a regular person. If you do have a woman who is pregnant or lactating, she's going to need a lot more than the typical recommendation, so she's definitely going to fall short on iron. And paleo diet as a whole tends to provide only about half of the overall suggested recommendation for calcium. So, a little fun fact about the paleo diet. U.S. News and World Report put together a panel of health experts, and they looked at 38 popular fad diets. They then reviewed them and evaluated them and ranked them based on their nutritional value, potential for weight loss, safety, efficacy, ease of compliance, and guess which diet came in next to last? The paleo diet tied for places 36 and 37, as it ranked low in multiple categories. You can see the overall score, weight loss score, and health rating listed at the bottom. So what's the take-home message? Well, there are some benefits of the paleo diet. It is very high in fruits and vegetables and emphasizes lean meat intake. However, there is zero evidence-based research supporting this diet in athletes, and really very little research overall on the paleo diet within healthy populations. The paleo diet and the paleo diet for athletes also contains several errors and misinterpretations of evidence-based research. You can find out more about this by researching on your own through evidence-based peer-reviewed journals. My references are also available on the last slide, and I'm happy to answer any questions I can. So I would not personally or professionally recommend the paleo diet to anyone, especially athletes. There are some health benefits that it does provide, however, because it excludes entire food groups and because there's really a lack of research, especially focusing on the athletic populations, that for those who strictly adhere to the paleo diet, they're going to be at a much higher risk of developing various vitamin and mineral deficiencies, which as a registered dietitian is something we want to avoid at all costs. Here's my list of references. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, I would love to hear your feedback. Thanks so much.